You step off the pavement and into the dust of Giza, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the plateau. Around you, the soundscape is busy. Tourists speaking in half a dozen languages, vendors offering trinkets, camel drivers urging rides with practiced calls. It feels, at first, like any other destination on the global circuit of wonders, crowded, commercial, almost familiar. But then you walk closer, beyond the fences and the chatter, and the modern world begins to thin away. There it is, the Sphinx. At first glance, it doesn't seem real. Photographs cannot prepare you for the way it sits in the earth, half carved, half emerging, its body not built but sculpted directly from the limestone bedrock itself. It crouches low to the ground, its paws extended forward as if holding its place against time itself. Its face, part lion, part human, partly gone, stares east as it has for thousands upon thousands of years. Watching the horizon where the sun rises each day without fail, you stop walking, you don't have a choice. The weight of it presses into you. This isn't just a monument. This feels like a memory carved into stone, and as you tilt your head back, letting your eyes trace the deep grooves cut into its flanks, something strange stirs. Those marks, vertical channels running down the stone, don't look like the work of wind and drifting sand. They look like water, falling again and again, carving the limestone with patience only centuries could grant. But this is the edge of the Sahara, a desert that has known only arid winds for millennia. When did this place last see such storms, such endless rains? You close your eyes and the sound of tourists begins to fade, the chatter dissolves, the fences vanish, and the hot air cools. Suddenly, you're standing not in a desert but in a savanna. The ground is damp beneath your feet, the air carries the smell of wet earth, and the horizon is broken by rivers spilling wide across fertile plains. Herds of antelope graze in the distance. Birds rise in sudden flocks startled by predators you cannot see. And there, crouched exactly where it always has been, the Sphinx watches, not as a ruin, but as something alive with purpose, already ancient in a world we have long forgotten. The image is so vivid that for a moment you don't know which world is real. The tourist thick desert of today, or this lush storm-fed land from before recorded time. The first time you stand before the Sphinx, you cannot help but ask the question that has haunted travellers for centuries. Who built this? And when? Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, never even mentioned the Sphinx in his writings. To him, the pyramids were marvel enough. But by then, the Sphinx was already weathered, already half buried in sand. Local priests may have known its story, but if they told it, the words did not survive. Silence, not history, surrounds its birth. Centuries later, Napoleon's soldiers would stand where you're standing now, their mouths open in awe, sketching the monument in their notebooks. Legend says they fired cannon shots at its face, blowing away the nose. Historians debate whether that story is true. Some point to earlier drawings showing the Sphinx already noseless. But the fact remains, generation after generation has come here and found mystery staring back at them. And now it is your turn. The desert air shifts. You glance again at the flanks of the Sphinx, those curious grooves cut deep into limestone. Egyptologists tell you the statue was carved around 2500 BCE to honour Pharaoh Khafre, builder of the second pyramid of Giza. But if those grooves are water erosion, as some geologists insist, then the Sphinx would have had to exist thousands of years earlier, when this land still drank the rains of a greener world. The thought is dizzying. If true, it would rewrite everything. Deserts are strange things. They bury as much as they reveal. Over the centuries, the Sphinx has been swallowed by sand again and again, until only its head peeked above the dunes. For much of its life, it lay hidden, forgotten, a monument erased from view by the desert itself. Kings came and went, empires rose and fell, and the Sphinx slumbered beneath the sands. Imagine stumbling upon it for the first time as early explorers did, Picture yourself cresting a dune and seeing that head rise from the sand, an enormous face staring back at you, body unseen, as though the desert had birthed it. What stories would you invent to explain it? What gods would you believe it represented? Some say the Sphinx was always a guardian, watching over the pyramids and the plateau. Others whisper that it was a monument far older, claimed by later dynasties but not created by them. In the silence of the desert, both versions feel possible. The mysteries of the Sphinx are not just about age. They multiply the longer you look. Why was it carved at all? Why here, from a single block of limestone bedrock rather than constructed piece by piece like the pyramids? Why the lion's body? Why the human face? And whose face is it? Some say Khafre, the pharaoh credited with its creation. Others argue it looks nothing like him. Its head is oddly small compared to its massive body, as if reshaped, recarved, altered at some point in its long life. If true, then the face you see today may not be the face it wore at birth. The more you stare, the less you know. Standing here, the present begins to blur. You are caught between worlds, the modern bustle of Giza with its buses and cell phones, and the deep silence of an age that no longer exists. You can almost hear the storms of 10,000 years ago, pounding rain cutting those vertical grooves. You can almost see the Nile swollen with Ice Age floods, washing wide across a land green and alive. And through it all, the Sphinx remains, watching, enduring, waiting for us to ask the right questions. If the Sphinx really is older than history tells us, then who built it? Was it the Old Kingdom Egyptians inheriting and perhaps restoring something far older? Was it a lost culture, advanced in ways we do not yet understand, carving their knowledge into stone before disappearing beneath the floodwaters of the Ice Age? What we know is this: the Sphinx refuses to fit neatly into the story we've written. Its weathering speaks of rain in a desert. Its face hints at recarving. Its very existence suggests continuity between worlds we think of as separate, the prehistoric and the historical, the forgotten and the remembered. As the sun begins to set, the desert cools. Shadows stretch long across the plateau and the Sphinx darkens, its form blending with the earth. You feel more than ever that you're standing in the presence of something vast, not just in size but in time. For thousands of years, travellers have come here and asked the same questions you're asking now. Scholars, soldiers, wanderers, kings. Each generation projects its own answers, its own myths. But the Sphinx itself remains silent. It does not correct us. It only endures, watching as civilizations rise and fall, as rains turn to deserts, as history forgets and then remembers again. And so you leave with the same unanswered thought that has haunted humanity for centuries. What if the Sphinx, and even the pyramids beside it, are not monuments of the pharaohs at all, but echoes of a civilization far older, one buried beneath the sands of time and the floods of the Ice Age? The desert gives no reply, only silence. But in that silence, the question lingers, pulling you deeper, insisting that you keep looking, keep wondering, keep listening for the story these stones might one day tell. Now shift your gaze from the stone to the sky. Picture a time when the Sahara was not a vast canvas of beige, but a living map of lakes and grasslands. Imagine storms rolling in across a greener North Africa, seasons that left their marks in sudden downpours and long wet spells. That was real. The planet moved. The tilt and wobble nudged the rains north, and for thousands of years this part of the world breathed moisture. Even after that green age began to fade, the drying did not happen all at once. There were steps, pauses, flickers of wet and dry. If heavy rain could still fall when the early dynasties rose, if floods from the Nile could front-load water into cuts and joints, then rounded walls do not have to mean the statue is as old as the myths we tell about ice and fire and loss. But what if the most striking signatures formed earlier, when storms were not rare visitors but regular guests? What if some of the rock's smoothness is a memory from that older sky? You climb back down into the enclosure and the air cools again. The walls around you are not blank. They are layered history. In some places, the stone peels, thin wafers lifting and breaking the way old paint blisters from a damp wall. In other places, vertical runnels trace long paths, dipping and swelling like a slow river frozen in place. Think about how stone weathers when it drinks salt. Groundwater creeps up. It evaporates at the surface. The salt crystallizes and pushes, getting into tiny spaces and forcing them wider. A grain becomes a crack becomes a flake becomes a scallop. Add the fact that the Sphinx's body runs through bands of softer and harder limestone, and you can read the pattern as a dialogue between rock and time. You can even picture centuries when the statue slept under sand, safe from wind but not from moisture that climbed and fell with the seasons. Then someone clears the sand, worships here, builds here, repairs blocks, writes a stele, and the cycle starts again. Hold both ideas in your mind at once. On the one hand, a 4th dynasty project, with quarrying that fed nearby temples, with alignments and layouts that make sense inside a royal complex. On the other hand, scars that look like rain, a head-to-body mismatch that raises eyebrows, a climate record that proves this land knew water in ways it does not today. The question is not whether one side must erase the other. The question is whether the simplest reading of all the layers puts the Sphinx inside the age of the pyramids or back beyond the border of written memory. If you let the story become a contest, you will miss the beauty of the puzzle itself. Better to keep walking, to keep looking, to feel how the ground under your shoes is the same ground the carvers struck with copper tools, the same ground where later hands patched and braced and tried to stop the stone from falling away. You pause by the chest where restoration masonry climbs like a different colour in a painting. You're standing in the 18th dynasty and the 20th century and today, all at once. New Kingdom princes dreamed here and promised offerings if only the sand would move from the lion's body. Engineers poured collars and faced walls. Conservators studied salt, wind, humidity. The statue is not a fossil, it is a living patient with a long chart. The skin of stone keeps changing, and each change leaves a line that someone later will point to and say, "See, there, that proves it." But proofs in archaeology rarely work like that. They are mosaics of small, stubborn pieces. They are habits and logistics and debris piles and tool marks and matching strata. They are the quiet facts that do not shout on television, the kind you find by counting blocks and comparing layers until a pattern emerges. So let's try a different angle. Imagine, just for a minute, that you are here 12,000 years ago. The air is cooler, the storms are stronger, the desert boundary pulls back. You stand at a limestone rise and choose a shape waiting inside the bedrock. You cut a trench that will both free your lion and protect it, a moat that becomes a museum wall. The face you carve is not a king, but a guardian, a watcher for the river's bend. Time flows. Sand spills in and seals the hollow. Thousands of years later, other builders arrive, find the old lion and build around it. Valley temple here, causeway there, claiming the power of the place without laying the first stone. Could that happen? Yes in story, easily. Yes in geology, if the scars truly belong to a wetter world. Yes in imagination, which is where new questions come from. But if it happened, where are the tools from that first team? Where are the camps, the broken blades, the garbage pits that humans always leave behind? The ground is quiet on that point, and silence is its own kind of answer. You climb out one last time and stand where modern tourists line up for pictures. The face meets your eyes, steady and a little sad, like a person who has watched too much and learned to wait. You think about how many times someone has announced the final word on this statue, how many times a neat answer has crumbled the way salt pops stone. You do not need certainty to feel wonder. You do not need to pick a side to keep asking better questions. If you're still with me now, Tell me where you're listening from and what the light looks like outside your window. Maybe you're in a city or on a train or washing dishes with a show playing over the sound of water. Wherever you are, the Sphinx is still there, and the wind is still moving grit across old limestone, and the debate is still alive. You don't have to believe the oldest possible date. You only have to let the possibility drift across your mind like a change in weather. Cool air rolling in at dusk, a hint of rain where you don't expect it, a story that holds its shape even as the edges soften. Step away for a moment from the whispers of mystery and into the story that the textbooks tell. This is the official version, the one archaeologists teach, and tour guides repeat at Giza. In this account, the Sphinx and the pyramids are not relics of forgotten civilizations or Ice Age survivors, but the crowning achievements of Egypt's Old Kingdom, built during the reign of the 4th dynasty, around 4,500 years ago. Picture Egypt in 2500 BCE. The Nile swells each year with its flood, spilling over the banks and leaving behind rich black soil. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, and farmers bend low in the fields, cutting grain by hand and bundling it into stacks beneath the sun. The river is not just water, it is lifeblood, feeding the people, filling the granaries and binding the kingdom together. Over it all presides the Pharaoh, not just a ruler but a living god. His word orders the cosmos itself. In this telling, the monuments of Giza are extensions of that divine power. Khufu, second king of the dynasty, commands the building of the Great Pyramid, a project so massive it seems to defy the limits of human will. More than 2 million blocks of stone are fitted together with such precision that even now, 4.5 millennia later, the joints are tight enough that a blade cannot slip between them. Its sides are aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal directions, its base nearly level across 13 acres of desert plateau. It is a tomb, yes, but also a statement. The pharaoh's rule is eternal, carved into the very bones of the earth. Khufu's son Khafre inherits his father's ambition. He orders his own pyramid, slightly smaller but still immense, rising beside the first. And to guard it, he commands a form unlike anything seen before, a lion's body crouched in the sand, its head carved in human likeness. This, according to mainstream archaeology, is the Great Sphinx. The fusion of man and beast proclaims the pharaoh's power. Intelligence joined with strength, mortal merged with divine. Facing east, it gazes toward the rising sun, greeting Ra each morning as the sun god's eternal witness. This is the narrative passed down through lectures and textbooks. The Sphinx, they tell us, is Khafre himself watching over his pyramid. The causeway from his pyramid leads toward it, linking tomb, temple and guardian into a unified whole. Nearby, the Valley Temple was built with blocks that may have been quarried when the Sphinx was carved. To the Egyptologist, it all fits together like pieces of a puzzle, one great design executed within a single generation. And what of the builders themselves? For centuries, popular imagination pictured them as slaves, an image cemented by Hollywood and the Bible. But excavations near Giza tell another story. Archaeologists have uncovered workers' villages complete with bakeries, breweries and dormitories, traces of bread ovens and fish bones, even jars of beer, suggest these labourers were fed well and cared for. Graffiti carved into the blocks reveal teams with names like the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure, suggesting camaraderie and pride rather than chains and suffering. In this vision, tens of thousands of men worked in shifts, perhaps drafted from villages during the flood season when their fields were underwater. They hauled limestone blocks from nearby quarries, granite from Aswan, tools of copper chisels and pounding stones of dolerite in their hands. With sledges dragged across sand, water poured to reduce friction, and ramps rising alongside the growing structures, they built what seems almost impossible. Not slaves but loyal subjects labouring in honour of their pharaoh, their work part of the eternal cycle of the gods. The Sphinx in this story was their masterpiece. Carved directly from the plateau's bedrock, It was a statement of religious devotion, a guardian of Khafre's afterlife. Its purpose was not mystery but faith. Its meaning was not lost but clear. Man as king, king as God, God as lion, gazing forever east toward the dawn. Archaeologists date the Sphinx not through inscriptions carved upon it. Curiously, there are none, but through its context. It sits aligned with Khafre's pyramid. Its valley temple is built from limestone blocks quarried around its enclosure. The architectural style matches the period. To the Egyptologist, the case is closed. Around 2500 BCE, during the height of the Old Kingdom, the Great Sphinx of Giza was born. When asked about claims that the monument is older, scholars are often dismissive. The erosion patterns that fringe theorists point to as evidence of rain are explained instead as the work of wind, sand, and salt. The supposed star alignments with Orion's belt or the constellation Leo are called coincidences, the kind of patterns the human mind cannot help but see. Archaeology, they argue, is not built on speculation or imagination, but on evidence. Pottery shards, inscriptions, quarry marks, and these all point firmly to the Fourth Dynasty. There is comfort in this version of events. It is neat, orderly, secure. The pyramids and the Sphinx fit perfectly into the arc of human progress. A civilization rising from mud brick villages to stone monuments, achieving greatness through ingenuity and collective effort. There is no need for lost knowledge, no hidden history buried under sand. The Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were enough. Brilliant engineers, devout people, masters of stone. And yet, as you stand at Giza with this narrative in mind, something doesn't quite fit. If the Sphinx was Khafre's monument, why is there no inscription anywhere on its body naming him as its builder? When Egyptians were otherwise meticulous in stamping their pharaohs' names upon almost everything they touched? Why is the head so small in proportion to its massive body, as if reshaped or recarved from something older? Why do those grooves along its sides resemble water channels more than wind scars? The official story answers many questions, but it does not answer them all. Its timeline is clear, but its silence is louder still. For if the Sphinx truly is Khafre's, why does it feel so much older? Why does it seem to stare not only at the rising sun, but at a past we no longer remember? Mainstream history provides the certainty, but in the shadows of that certainty, mystery waits, demanding to be heard. And it is in those cracks between what is told and what is seen that the real story may begin to unfold. Stand again before the Sphinx. You've heard the official story, the neat account of pharaohs and dynasties. But when you look closer, the monument itself seems to resist the tale you've been told. Its silence is heavy, but its body whispers questions the textbooks leave unanswered. The first and most striking anomaly lies in its weathered flanks. The sides of the Sphinx enclosure are scarred with deep, rounded grooves running vertically down the limestone. To a casual eye, they may look unremarkable, just the wear of time. But to a geologist like Robert Schoch, who studied them in the 1990s, they told a different story. These are not the sharp, horizontal marks of sand-blasting desert winds. They are the smooth, vertical channels carved by falling rain. Rain in the Sahara. Egyptologists rejected the claim immediately, but the geology was plain. For water to have cut those grooves, the Sphinx would have had to endure centuries of heavy rainfall, and that hasn't happened here for at least 9,000 years, long before the Old Kingdom, long before the rise of dynasties. If Schoch was right, then the Sphinx was not carved in 2500 BCE. It was carved millennia earlier, in an age when the Sahara was green, but that is only the first whisper of strangeness. Look again at the proportions. The Sphinx's head is oddly small compared to its massive lion's body. It seems almost out of place, as though it had been reshaped, recarved from something larger. Could the original head have been a lion's, later recut into the likeness of a pharaoh? If so, the statue we see today might be the second life of something even older, its true form lost to the chisel. And then there is the silence of inscriptions. The Egyptians loved to write their names into eternity. Pharaohs carved their marks on statues, temples, tombs, everywhere their authority reached. Yet the Sphinx bears no cartouche, no hieroglyph, no mark of Khafre or any king. For a monument supposedly made in his honour, the absence is deafening. Some say this is proof enough that it predates the pharaohs, that they inherited it and claimed it, but did not build it. Add to this the mystery of its missing nose, a detail often exaggerated but still symbolic. Some say it was destroyed by cannon fire from Napoleon's troops. Others blame local iconoclasts centuries earlier. Whatever the truth, the loss only deepens the sense that the Sphinx has lived many lives, weathering not just storms but generations of human violence and neglect. It has become less a monument than a survivor, altered, scarred, unclaimed. Turn now from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid that rises behind it. At first glance, it too fits neatly into the narrative of Pharaoh Khufu's tomb. But step inside, and the anomalies begin to gather like shadows. The Great Pyramid is the largest of them all, containing over 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing up to 70 tons. Yet despite its grandeur, no body has ever been found inside it. No funerary inscriptions, no treasures, no hieroglyphs on its walls. For a tomb, it is curiously silent. The Egyptians filled their burial chambers with texts, prayers, and images meant to guide the soul into the afterlife. But the inside of Khufu's pyramid is stark, bare, as though its purpose was never funerary at all. And then there is its precision. The base is nearly level to within less than an inch. Its sides align almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions, more accurately than modern compasses point north. Its construction required cutting and moving blocks with tolerances so fine that engineers today marvel at the achievement. Copper chisels and wooden sledges, Egyptologists say, were enough. But to many, the scale and precision seem to hint at something more, something we do not yet understand. Inside, the design grows stranger still. The so-called King's Chamber, constructed from massive granite blocks hauled from Aswan hundreds of miles away, is roofed by layers of stone that relieve pressure with mathematical elegance. Above it, hidden chambers lie stacked like forgotten secrets. And higher still, within the core of the pyramid, modern scans have revealed a massive void, an empty space the length of a passenger jet, unseen for thousands of years. Its purpose remains unknown. The air shafts puzzle researchers as well. Narrow tunnels extend from the chambers to the exterior, some aligned with stars in Orion and Sirius. Ventilation, some say. Symbolic alignment, others argue. But why such precision for mere symbolism? Why such effort for something unseen by human eyes? And then comes the greatest contradiction of all. If these were truly tombs, why were no pharaohs ever found inside them? Not just Khufu's pyramid, but none of the 3 great pyramids at Giza yielded a body. Empty chambers stripped of artifacts stand as their legacy. Some say they were looted. Others whisper they were never tombs at all, but something else entirely. Power plants, storehouses of knowledge, initiatory temples. The theories are endless because the evidence is so thin. Back outside, you feel the weight of these anomalies pressing in. The Sphinx carved with rain scars in a desert. Its head too small for its body, its surface void of names. The Great Pyramid, precision beyond reason. Chambers without mummies, shafts aligned with stars. Egyptologists insist there are answers. Wind, sand and salt explain the erosion. The small head is simply a stylistic choice. The missing inscriptions, perhaps they were painted and lost. The empty chambers, robbed in antiquity. To them these are not mysteries but mundane truths, stripped of wonder by the passage of time. But as you stand beneath the gaze of the Sphinx and the shadow of the pyramid, the explanations feel less certain. You cannot shake the sense that you're looking at something older, stranger, something that does not belong in the neat boxes of history. The monuments do not feel like tombs. They feel like messages, carved in stone, waiting to be understood. And so the questions deepen. Who carved the Sphinx before the rain stopped? Who aligned the pyramids so perfectly with the heavens? Why were such vast efforts made only to leave behind empty stone and silence? The answers, if they exist, lie buried in sand and time, but the anomalies stand in plain sight, refusing to fade, and it is here, in these cracks between what we are told and what we can see, that the mystery of Giza takes root. Because if the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid are not what we think they are, then the story of human history may be far older and far stranger than we dare imagine. The desert lies silent now, stretching in every direction as far as the eye can see. Sand dunes ripple like frozen waves, and the heat shimmers above them, a mirage of emptiness. But what if I told you this was not always a desert? What if I told you the Sahara was once green? Close your eyes and let the world shift. The dunes flatten, rivers carve wide channels through the land, and rains fall heavy and endless across a fertile plain. This is not imagination. This is history. Deep history. The world as it looked thousands of years ago during the last ice age. 20,000 years ago, the Earth was locked in cold. Vast sheets of ice blanketed North America, Europe, and Asia. Glaciers stretched like armies, their frozen walls miles thick, their weight pressing down on the land. The sea levels were lower, continents stretched further, and the air carried a chill even here in Africa. Yet paradoxically, the Sahara was not the wasteland we know today. Instead, it was alive. The rains came often, sweeping across the plains, filling lakes so vast they covered regions now nothing but sand. Rivers meandered, carving valleys that can still be traced from the air, though now they lie dry and forgotten. Grasslands stretched wide, dotted with acacia trees and thick with herds of antelope, gazelles, and even elephants. Lions hunted here, not as symbols carved into stone, but as living predators stalking the tall grass. Crocodiles basked in wide lakes, hippos stirred the shallows, and the air buzzed with life. The Nile, too, was not the narrow ribbon of green we know. It surged with glacial meltwater, swelling far beyond its modern banks. Its floodplain stretched wide, fertile and abundant, a lifeline not just for Egypt but for all of northeast Africa. To stand here then would have been to stand in a world utterly unrecognisable to us today. And somewhere in that lush landscape the Sphinx may already have crouched. Return for a moment to those vertical grooves on the Sphinx's body. The claim that they were carved by rain is not idle speculation. It is rooted in the very cycles of Earth's climate. The Sahara has not always been a desert. Over the last 100,000 years, it has swung back and forth between wet and dry, like a pendulum driven by the tilt of the Earth's axis and the shifting patterns of monsoons. Geologists call it the African humid periods. Roughly every 20,000 years, rains return. Grass replaces sand, rivers flow again, and the desert becomes green. The last great humid phase began around 12,000 years ago and lasted until about 5000 BCE, long before Khafre, but exactly within the time frame some claim the Sphinx's erosion demands. If the monument truly shows the scars of rain, then it was carved not in the arid age of pharaohs, but in this wetter, greener world. A world where builders could have watched storms drench the plateau, water running down the Sphinx's sides as though nature itself was aging it. Evidence of this green Sahara still lies buried. In the caves of the Gilf Kebir Plateau, deep in the desert, explorers have found paintings left behind by early humans. Figures of cattle graze on grasslands. Hunters with bows chase antelope. Crocodiles and fish are painted where today there is only dust. These are not myths. They are memories carved into stone, testimony that people lived and thrived in what we now call a desert. Even satellite images reveal the ghosts of rivers, branching networks of valleys and channels that once carried water across the Sahara. Beneath the sands, the outlines of ancient lakes remain, their beds fossilized in silence. In some places, fossils of hippos and crocodiles are still found. their bones preserved in the dry earth, as if to whisper, "Once, this place was alive." And in this wetter world, could there not have been cultures, peoples, capable of carving monuments from stone? The official record places such achievements far later, but what if the evidence has been buried, erased by time, or drowned by floods at the end of the Ice Age? 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to die. The glaciers retreated, releasing torrents of meltwater into the seas. Ocean levels rose, swallowing coastlines, drowning valleys, erasing landscapes that had been home to generations. Geologists call these events meltwater pulses, sudden surges that lifted the oceans by meters in a geological heartbeat. Imagine living on a coast when the sea rose not inches but feet within a lifetime. Villages washed away, fields lost, knowledge scattered. It was a time of upheaval, chaos, transformation. And in the Nile Valley, the floods carved new courses, reshaping the river that had always been the artery of life. It was during this period that the Sahara began to swing once more toward dryness. The rain slowed, the lakes shrank, the grasslands withered. By around 3000 BCE, just as Egypt's dynasties began to rise, the green Sahara was fading into the desert we know today. The timing is haunting. A fertile world vanishes, a desert takes its place, and in the middle of it, monuments like the Sphinx and pyramids emerge, already ancient to those who inherit them. Close your eyes again and see the Nile as it might have been in this time. Not a thin line of green winding through desert, but a sprawling network of channels, floodplains, and marshes. Boats drift across wide waters, hunters stalk hippos in the shallows, and people gather along fertile banks rich with crops. The air hums with insects, birds flash overhead, and the sound of running water never fades. If the Sphinx already crouched here, then it gazed not across dunes but across rivers. Its paws rested not on dry sand but on damp earth. Its face watched the storms gather, lightning splitting the horizon, rain falling so hard it carved stone. Could it be that the Sphinx was not carved for Khafre at all, but by a people who lived in this forgotten Nile, whose memory has washed away like the floods that carried their world downstream? Suddenly the anomalies of the Sphinx make sense in this world. Its erosion is the work of storms. Its missing inscriptions reflect not absence but age, born long before hieroglyphs were even invented. Its face may have been altered later, reshaped by dynasties who found it already standing, a relic of a civilization lost in time. And the pyramids too take on new possibility. If aligned to Orion around 10,500 BCE, as some claim, then they were not designed for Khufu but inherited, adopted, repurposed. Monuments from an earlier age, adapted by the pharaohs as their own. Of course, mainstream archaeology resists this view. They point to the lack of artifacts, the absence of tools, the silence of written records. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and yet the climate record is undeniable. The Sahara was once green, rain once fell on Giza. People once painted crocodiles on rocks where only sand remains today. The question is not whether the climate could have supported such monuments, but whether a culture existed capable of building them. And here the evidence is thinner, more fragile. But does absence prove non-existence, or does it point to how much we have yet to uncover? The winds pick up on the plateau, stirring the sand around your feet. For a moment you hear it differently. Not as desert wind, but as the memory of storms. The Sphinx crouches before you, and you can almost see the rain falling again, water streaming down its flanks, carving those grooves one drop at a time. You can almost see the rivers of a forgotten Nile rushing past, swollen with glacial melt, carrying with it the remnants of worlds we no longer know. It is easy to dismiss anomalies when the desert is all you see. But when you imagine the Ice Age backdrop, green Sahara, swollen Nile, rising seas, the questions refuse to fade. Could it be that our timeline is incomplete? that the Sphinx and perhaps even the pyramids are echoes of a civilization that lived and died before history began. The textbooks do not say so, but the stones do not care what the textbooks say. They bear their scars in silence, waiting for us to listen. Picture the world at the end of the Ice Age. The glaciers that once locked continents in ice are breaking apart, their collapse echoing like thunder across valleys and plains. Seas are rising, not slowly as they do today, but visibly within a lifetime. A shoreline where children once played has vanished beneath waves by the time those children grow old. Coastlines retreat, rivers carve new courses, islands disappear. The land itself is changing too quickly to understand. For those who lived through it, survival was everything. Villages built along fertile coasts and estuaries, where resources were abundant, were suddenly drowned. Families fled inland, abandoning fields, monuments, and memories to the sea. They carried what they could on their backs: tools, livestock, stories. Knowledge had to survive in words, in song, in memory. Technology and cities might be lost, but stories could endure. What if some of these people remembered more than just myths? What if they remembered astronomy, agriculture, stone-building techniques, ways of measuring the heavens? To us, their stories might sound like legends, but to them, they were history. Imagine the desperation of a culture watching its world drown, knowing that everything it had built might vanish. What would you do? Perhaps you would carve something into stone. Perhaps you would pass down a story hoping your children, or your children's children, would remember. It is in this crucible of survival that the theory of a lost civilization begins to make sense. The monuments at Giza may not be the sudden flowering of genius in the Old Kingdom, but the inheritance of knowledge that had already been refined, preserved, and carried through cataclysm. The Sphinx's water scars, the pyramids' alignments, the myths of floods, they all whisper the same possibility. We are not the first, but only the latest chapter in a story far older than we know. In the 1990s, writer Graham Hancock gave this possibility a voice powerful enough to echo around the world. His book, Fingerprints of the Gods, was not an academic treatise, but it struck something deeper. It invited readers to imagine that our story was older, stranger and richer than the textbooks admit. Hancock argued that an advanced Ice Age civilization once thrived, that it was destroyed in the chaos of floods and rising seas, and that remnants of its knowledge survived into later cultures. Hancock pointed to anomalies. Why do so many flood myths exist in cultures that never had contact with one another? Why do some ancient monuments, like the Sphinx and pyramids, seem misdated or too advanced for the societies credited with them? Why do star alignments place some structures thousands of years earlier than mainstream archaeology allows? These questions were not proof, but they were provocations, sparks cast into the darkness of accepted history. The academic world rejected him. Archaeologists labelled his work pseudoscience, accusing him of cherry-picking data, stretching myths into evidence, and ignoring inconvenient facts. Yet Hancock's influence only grew, precisely because he asked the questions others refused to. His books and documentaries did something the textbooks rarely managed. They made the past feel alive, unfinished, mysterious. And perhaps that is why his ideas resonate. People look at the Sphinx and feel in their bones that it's older than the pharaohs. They see Gobekli Tepe, rising 7,000 years before agriculture was supposed to exist, and sense that history's neat timeline is a fragile construct. Hancock didn't offer certainty. He offered possibility. And sometimes possibility is more powerful than fact. Consider for a moment the universality of flood myths. Plato's Atlantis is the most famous, a mighty island civilization swallowed in a single day and night of catastrophe. To Plato, it was a parable of arrogance, but for later generations it became something else, a memory disguised as a story. Travel east, and you find the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim survives a great flood sent by the gods, his ark carrying life to safety. move west, and the Bible tells of Noah, his ark riding waters that cover the world. In India, the ancient texts speak of Manu, warned by a divine fish of a flood that would end an age. The Polynesians tell of islands drowned. The Native Americans recall waters that swallowed tribes and forests. Even in the high Andes, far from the sea, legends speak of deluges that reset the world. What are we to make of this? Skeptics say flood myths are natural metaphors. Every culture knows local floods, and the trauma of such events echoes into myth. But is it coincidence that so many of these myths describe not just floods, but floods that end an age? That they so often involve survivors, chosen or warned, carrying knowledge or life into the next world? Perhaps these stories are more than allegories. Perhaps they're cultural memories, stretched and shaped by time, but rooted in real events. The end of the Ice Age was a time of catastrophic floods. Meltwater pulses raised the seas by dozens of feet. Rivers burst their banks, lakes drained suddenly, coastlines retreated. It was the perfect stage for myth to become memory, for memory to become legend. And if Atlantis was only a story, why does the world keep repeating it in so many voices across so many lands? If a civilization did exist before the floods, its ruins would not be on dry land. They would be underwater, beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. And that is exactly where some anomalies have been found. Off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, divers discovered massive stone formations with terraces, steps and platforms. To some, they are natural formations. To others, they are the remnants of a city drowned long ago. Its streets now home to fish and coral. When you see the photographs, it is hard not to imagine staircases, plazas and walls, all carved in a style we do not expect to find beneath the sea. Far away in the Bahamas, the so-called Bimini Road lies beneath shallow waters, a long stretch of massive stone blocks arranged like a causeway. Mainstream geologists call it natural beach rock, fractured by waves. Alternative researchers insist it is too regular, too deliberate, the remains of something built by human hands. Near the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar surveys revealed outlines of what appeared to be submerged structures. Divers recovered artifacts. Some claim to be tens of thousands of years old, though the findings remain hotly debated. Off the coast of Dwarka, another site revealed walls and foundations beneath the water, fueling speculation that ancient cities, described in India's epic texts, may have been real. Each of these discoveries is contested, explained away or ignored, but together they form a haunting pattern. So many of these anomalies lie precisely where the oceans rose after the Ice Age. If people lived there, their cities would now be gone, their memory reduced to whispers of Atlantis, of floods, of a world before the sea. If there is a smoking gun for lost civilizations, it may be Gobekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s, it overturned everything archaeologists thought they knew. Here was a temple complex with massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing up to 20 tons. The stones were carved with animals, lions, snakes, vultures, scorpions, etched with symbolic imagery. The scale was staggering, the craftsmanship undeniable, but the dating was the true shock, 9,600 BCE. This was a time when humanity, according to the textbooks, was still composed of hunter-gatherers. Agriculture had not yet taken root. Villages were primitive, transient, and yet here was architecture on a monumental scale, created by people who should not have been capable of it. Even more curious, Gobekli Tepe was not destroyed. It was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. For centuries it lay hidden, preserved under layers of soil, as if someone wanted to protect it, to seal it away. Why? Was it a shrine to forgotten gods, a ceremonial centre for people we no longer know? Or was it a relic of the very civilization Hancock described, a survivor from the age before floods? Gobekli Tepe proves one thing beyond debate. Advanced construction existed at the end of the Ice Age, and if it existed in Turkey, why not in Egypt? Why not in other corners of the world now buried under sea or sand? But if such a civilization existed, what was their technology? Mainstream archaeology insists they had none beyond stone tools and muscle, yet the evidence of monuments raises questions. How are stones of 70 tons quarried, transported and lifted with copper chisels and ropes? How are blocks cut so precisely that even today we struggle to replicate them? How did ancient builders align monuments so perfectly to the stars, measuring precession over thousands of years? Speculation abounds. Some suggest forgotten techniques with leverage, counterweights, or water. Others whisper of sound used to move stone, or knowledge of resonance and vibration now lost. Still others imagine tools made of materials that did not survive, wood, composites, metals that corroded away. The truth may not be mystical at all. It may be that knowledge was lost because it was never written, only practiced. When the floods came and the builders died, their secrets vanished with them. What remains are the stones themselves, standing as riddles to be solved. If an Ice Age civilization did fall, could survivors have spread fragments of their knowledge to others? This idea threads through myths across the world. In Egypt, the god Thoth was said to bring wisdom and writing. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl appeared after disaster to teach farming, astronomy and law. In Mesopotamia, Oannes emerged from the sea, half man, half fish, bearing the gift of writing and civilization. In Polynesian myths, culture bringers arrive by canoe after great floods. In the Andes, Viracocha is remembered as a tall, bearded figure who came after the world was destroyed, teaching humanity how to rebuild. These figures are too similar to ignore, bringers of knowledge, teachers of forgotten skills, always arriving after catastrophe. Perhaps they were myths, or perhaps they were survivors, stragglers from a drowned civilization carrying scraps of memory into the next age, reshaped into gods by those who received them. Mainstream history rejects this possibility, and the reasons are not only scientific. Archaeology is cautious because its foundation is evidence, and evidence of a lost civilization is scarce. But there is more at play. To accept such a theory would be to rewrite the story of humanity, to admit that we are not the first to stand tall, but the inheritors of a forgotten world. It would shatter timelines, upend careers, rewrite textbooks. Science advances by challenging paradigms, but it also defends them fiercely. A young archaeologist proposing a lost civilization risks ridicule, funding, reputation, and so the anomalies are explained away, smoothed over, dismissed. Wind and sand, coincidence, primitive genius. The story is kept clean, even if the stones themselves resist. But silence is not proof, and resistance does not erase mystery. The monuments endure, their questions growing sharper each year. Stand again on the plateau at Giza. The Sphinx crouches in the sand, the pyramids rise behind it, and the desert stretches silent to the horizon. Now imagine these same stones not in the age of pharaohs, but in an age of rains and rivers, of floods and forests, of civilizations drowned by rising seas. Imagine them as survivors of a world erased, their builders forgotten, their purpose obscured. This is the possibility of lost civilizations, not certainty, not proof, but possibility. A reminder that history may not be the straight line we're told, but a cycle of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting. You do not need to believe it. You only need to let the thought linger, like the sound of waves over a drowned shore, whispering of a world that may yet lie beneath the sea. Night comes fast on the plateau, and with it the modern world falls away. The air cools, footsteps fade, and a hush settles over the sand like a blanket. Above you, the sky opens into a velvet field pricked with fire. The Milky Way drifts like a pale river, and familiar constellations sharpen until they feel close enough to touch. The pyramids turn from monuments into silhouettes, black mountains against the stars. You stand between stone and sky and feel that neither is complete without the other. The Sphinx crouches in profile, its gaze fixed where dawn will break. The pyramids hold their angles with a stubborn geometric patience, as if the lines themselves are listening for some secret rhythm overhead. The longer you look, the more the place feels like a conversation. Light answering limestone, limestone answering light. For the people who first watched this sky from these stones, the heavens were not decoration. They were clock, calendar, and scripture at once. Stars were gods, and gods were stars. Their risings and settings were not abstractions but appointments to be kept, rituals to be observed, promises of return. If you built for eternity, you aligned with eternity. If you spoke to the divine, you spoke the language of the sky. Here, in the quiet, a suspicion grows into a certainty. The builders were not only architects of stone, they were cartographers of heaven, embedding above into below so completely that one could not be read without the other. Look down from the air. 3 pyramids arranged not in a straight line but with a subtle offset. 2 large, 1 smaller, tilted slightly west. Look up to Orion's belt. 3 bright stars arranged not in a straight line but with a subtle offset. 2 bright, 1 dimmer, tilted slightly the same way. The match is not perfect in scale, yet the echo's undeniable, like a signature repeated in a different hand. In the old stories, Orion is Osiris, lord of death and rebirth. The Great Pyramid, largest and brightest, mirrors Alnitak. Khafre's, proud but lesser, echoes Al-Nilam. Menkar's small pyramid, stepped and shy, answers Mintaka. Along the Nile, the river bends like a terrestrial Milky Way. Above, the Milky Way spills like a celestial Nile. Earth copies sky. Sky answers Earth. You don't need diagrams to feel the intention. Standing here at night is enough. Engineers will measure angles and tolerances, priests measure meaning, yet even the practical mind has to pause at the precision. The base of the Great Pyramid lies almost perfectly level. Its sides point to the cardinal directions with a fidelity that makes compass needles blush. If you align so carefully to the north and south, why not also to the gods you see rising each season? Why would a people who read the heavens so fluently ignore the brightest sentence written across it? There is a final layer, the one that turns correlation into proposition, precession. If you wind the sky back like a clock, the belt of Orion crosses the meridian in ancient poses. The placement of the pyramid seems to whisper of a specific stance, a date hidden in geometry. Whether you accept the mathematics or simply feel the poetry, the question remains. Were these mountains of stone meant to mirror not just Orion, but Orion as he looked in an age the textbooks refuse? The Sphinx stares east, immovable, as if the horizon were an altar and dawn were a god who keeps his appointments. Today, when the equinox comes, the sun rises among stars we call Pisces, slowly drifting toward Aquarius, but the sky is not fixed. Over long ages, the equinox backs through the zodiac like a tide. Roll the heavens back far enough, and the spring sun claws up through Leo, a lion in the sky meeting a lion in stone. A guardian greets a guardian. The image is so clean it feels inevitable. The Sphinx's broad paws and folded haunches, a predator at rest. The blaze of the rising sun framed exactly where its eyes insist you look. Morning after morning, year after year, age after age, the same act of recognition. Light crowns the brow and heat wakes the face. Ritual is repetition, but this is more. It is choreography written across time. Skeptics call that a coincidence, a trick of hindsight. But stand here at first light and watch the stone ignite. Coincidence loses its force in the presence of ceremony. If you were a builder in an age when the equinox rose in Leo, how else would you honour the sky but by carving its image on the ground? If you inherited a guardian already crouching here, How else would you claim it but by letting the sun prove your priesthood each spring? When myth meets alignment, meaning compounds, the lion is royalty, strength, heat, and heart. The dawn is resurrection. The equinox is balance, day and night held in even hands. The Sphinx does not explain these things, it embodies them. And in the moment the sun clears the edge, it is hard to believe any of this is accidental. Precession is the slowest clock you will ever learn to read. Picture Earth as a spinning top but not perfectly upright. Its axis traces a circle in the sky over roughly 26 millennia. The star that marks north changes. The background at sunrise on the equinox slides through the zodiac in reverse. No single lifetime can see it all. That is the point. Precession is inheritance, a pattern you can only keep by passing it forward. How could ancient watchers have known? By doing the simple, difficult thing: looking, recording, remembering. A priest scratches a line on a wall where the sun touches at dawn. His grandson scratches another where the shadow ends at solstice. His great-granddaughter measures the slight shift in a rising star. Over centuries the drift is undeniable. The sky is moving. The god's throne is not where it was for the elders. Something larger than kings rotates above the world. Once seen, precession becomes a philosophy. It tells you that time is not a straight road, but a great wheel, that ages have faces and each returns. It tempts you to build in such a way that your structure becomes a reminder, a warning, a lesson, stone correcting memory. When the sky looks like this, the monument says, remember what happened the last time. If precession is encoded here, then the builders weren't just astronomers, they were archivists. They were speaking to us in the only language that doesn't rot, rust or burn, alignment and mass. Their message is patient because it must be. It takes an age to read an age. Giza is a headline, but Egypt's footnotes shine with the same ink. At Karnak, corridors frame the solstice sun so precisely that dawn feels choreographed. At Dendera, ceiling maps render the sky as a living law, gods wearing constellations like crowns, planets walking like courtiers down the aisle of time. At Abydos, reliefs speak in star names as if they were family, not distant fires, but kin whose visits are treasured and counted. Walk the river in your mind and you feel the pattern. Villages wake not by clocks but by risings. The year turns when Sirius glitters before sunrise. Festivals bloom when shadows strike thresholds at the exact angle priests have watched for generations. To modernise, this is superstition. To those who lived by it, it was physics of the sacred. The sky told the water when to rise and the people when to plant. Align your stones to the sky, and you align your life. Small shrines learn the same grammar as great pyramids. Doorways catch equinoxes. Courtyards hold solstices. Columns hide sightlines like strings through beads. Precision is not vanity. It is devotion. If you missed by a degree, you missed the god by a day. That was unacceptable, so you did not miss. This is why the sightlines at Giza feel inevitable. The culture that birthed them could not help but build that way. It was how they kept their appointments with eternity. Sirius is not just bright, it is punctual. After its season behind the sun, the star's first pre-dawn appearance, its heliacal rising, arrives in midsummer. In ancient Egypt, that wink of light was a drumbeat. The flood is coming, the black earth will drink, the seed will live. Sopdet, the goddess of Sirius, was not an ornament in myth. She was the calendar's keystone. Imagine the watch on those mornings. Priests on rooftops, eyes stinging from lack of sleep. Bowls of water used as mirrors to catch the faintest spark. A murmur passes along the parapet. There, and a cheer rises from the city below. In a world without weather forecasts, the star delivers the news. Salvation on schedule. Once a star saves your harvest, you carve it into everything. You place it on ceilings and balance it with gods. You teach children to look for it, and elders to bless it. You align your stones not because stars are pretty, but because stars are bred. Sirius made the year. Orion promised the return. Together they taught a theology of renewal you could measure. When you think of the Sphinx and pyramids in that light, their silence feels less mysterious. They are not mute, they are exact. The language they speak is timing, and Sirius was their perfect punctuation. Giza is not an island. On another continent, a broad avenue runs through Teotihuacan, and if you trace it across the sky, Orion listens. In the jungles of Cambodia, towers at Angkor Wat rise like a stone constellation, and scholars find echoes in Draco's coils as they would have looked long before the temples were raised. On Salisbury Plain, Stonehenge bites the sun at solstice like a hinge on a door the year swings through. You can explain each alignment locally, festival here, calendrical need there, but the chorus is hard to ignore. Human beings separated by oceans and ages all lifted their eyes, mapped cycles, and set stones to meet them. If knowledge travels by sea, survivors could have carried fragments from coast to coast after the waters rose. If not, perhaps the sky itself is so compelling that any people with time and patience will discover the same numbers. Either way, the pattern is generous. The heavens invite you to learn them, and stone is the only notebook that doesn't forget. Where paper rots and wood burns, lintels and lintels remain. If one culture forgets, a future one can stand in the same place and see the same light, fall on the same line and remember again. What begins as coincidence ends as curriculum. The world taught this lesson many times. We are only the latest class to take notes. Skeptics have a point. The brain loves patterns. Give us dots, and we draw lines. Give us lines, and we draw meaning. A careful mind must ask whether Orion at Giza is just a trick of arrangement, whether Leo at the horizon is only poetry pasted onto stone. It is wise to doubt. Doubt keeps you honest, but doubt also has a duty to scale. One coincidence is cute, two are interesting, a dozen, nested, cardinal alignments, stellar correlations, calendrical risings, ritual doorways catching solstices begin to behave like intent, especially when the culture in question told you plainly, in myth and ritual, that the sky mattered more than anything. Design does not mean perfection. The pyramids are not a photographic copy of Orion. They are a translation into the grammar of land and labour. Good design moves between mediums without losing meaning. Here the meaning is clear, as above, so below. If you accept that creed, then you expect to find what we find. And we do. Call it coincidence if you like. The stones will not argue. They were set for the sun and stars, not for us. But if you stand with them when the light arrives, coincidence begins to feel like a thin word for a thick reality. Picture a night of observance. The priests have fasted, the people have washed, torches gutter along a temple's outer wall, while inside the court the darkness is deliberate. Eyes need hours to widen. A low chant starts, a syllable on each inhalation, the breath of a crowd braided into a rope of sound. One by one markers appear, a star peaks, a line is checked, a notch is counted. A child stands on a father's shoulders to see over shoulders, to see over centuries. The moment comes. Orion clears the limb, the chant rises, the torches flare, and for a heartbeat the entire place is a lung filled with light. The ritual works because the sky is faithful. The alignment works because the builders were. Dawn has its own right. The Sphinx's brow takes the first blade of gold. The pyramids pull long shadows like ink across papyrus. Priests step forward with bowls of water to mirror the sky's brightness into the darkest corners, as if to baptize stone with its own reflection. Bread is broken, beer poured. The day begins not at random, but at appointment. To live like this is to feel folded into something vast. The stars teach patience. The seasons teach humility. The monuments, when they work, teach gratitude. You cannot fake a sunrise. Morning dissolves the constellations one by one, but the lesson they carried lingers like warmth in the stone. The Sphinx looks no different to the casual visitor at noon than it did at dawn, yet you know better now. You've seen its face ignite at the equinox line. You have watched Orion walk the meridian like a king along his hall. You have felt the breeze that always seems to rise when Sirius winks awake. Perhaps this is all coincidence, a net we cast over accidents until they resemble a catch. Or perhaps this is memory, the most stubborn kind, the kind set into angles and horizons so that forgetting requires effort. Myths can be denied. Alignments must be experienced. If the builders stitched sky to earth on purpose, they were telling us something simple and inexhaustible. Look up. Learn the rhythm that outlives kings. Build in such a way that your children can keep time with the gods, and when the ages turn, as they always do, your stones will still be here to teach. You do not have to swear to any of it. It is enough to stand where the light falls and let it touch your face. The message does the rest. Stand again at the base of the Sphinx, its paws stretch forward, its back ridges rise like a sleeping beast, its face stares east with an expression no desert can erode. For all its enormity, for all the centuries it has endured, one question presses louder than all others. Where are the builders? If Khafre's artisans carved this, where are the copper chisels worn to nubs, the discarded tools scattered in the sand? If entire workforces raise the pyramids, where are their detailed records, their inscriptions, their proud declarations of achievement? Egyptians carved the names of pharaohs into tombs, temples, even lesser statues. Yet here, on the greatest monument of them all, the silence is deafening. You search the stones for cartouches, for names, for marks of ownership, but the Sphinx and pyramids remain mute. They do not proclaim Khufu or Khafre. They do not name their architects. They do not boast of their builders. They simply exist, unclaimed, as if they were already ancient when the pharaohs found them. This silence is not just an absence, it is an anomaly. For a culture that inscribed almost everything, why not these? The absence itself feels like a message. We are not who you think we are. Archaeologists point to copper chisels, pounding stones and sledges as the tools that built Giza. They display them in museums, fragments dug from quarries and workshops. But there is a gap between what we see and what we imagine. A copper chisel may cut soft limestone, but can it cut granite, quarried from Aswan and hauled hundreds of miles to roof the king's chamber? Can pounding stones alone shape blocks weighing 70 tons with precision that rivals modern machining? If tools once existed that made this possible, where are they? Were they wood, long since rotted? Were they metals that corroded away? Or were they techniques so different from our own that we fail to recognize them even if they lie in plain sight? The deeper question is this. If a forgotten civilization did build or influence Giza, what traces would remain after 12,000 years of floods, desert winds and shifting sands? Stone survives, bronze rusts, cloth and wood vanish. If their technology was not our technology, it may be invisible to us, leaving only the monuments they intended to last. Perhaps that is why the stones feel so strange. They are the only survivors of a toolkit we no longer understand. The Sahara is a graveyard of worlds. Once it was green, filled with rivers and lakes, herds of antelope and tribes of hunters. Now it is a desert the size of a continent, burying whatever was left beneath dunes that roll and shift like a restless ocean. To dig in the Sahara is to sift not centuries but entire climates. A city here could be erased not by conquest, but by wind. The seas tell the same story. At the end of the Ice Age, when the glaciers melted, oceans rose more than 300 feet. Coastlines disappeared, islands drowned, estuaries filled with salt. If you were looking for the heart of a seafaring people, you would not find it on land today. You would find it underwater, hidden beneath centuries of coral, sand and tide. This may be why the builders are missing. Their homes, their workshops, their ports, they are under the sea or beneath the dunes. We stand on the plateau and ask where they are, when in truth we are standing too high. The evidence lies where we cannot yet look, under waves and shifting sands. Where is the capital of those who might have built the pyramids? Where are their markets, their streets, their graves? If a civilization advanced enough to cut stone and measure the stars once thrived, surely they had cities. Yet no such city has been uncovered. But history is not fair. Cities are fragile, built of wood, clay, reed, and mud brick. Rain can wash them away, floods can erase them in a season, fire can consume them in a night. Only stone, massive and immovable, survives. And what did this people choose to build in stone? Not houses, not palaces, but monuments, pyramids, temples, guardians. If we expect their cities to last like their shrines, we may be asking the wrong question. It is possible the builders did not live as we imagine, in sprawling cities with bustling markets. Perhaps they were fewer, more focused, building not for comfort but for memory. Or perhaps their cities did exist. Thriving, vibrant, advanced, and the sea has swallowed them, leaving us only with the bones of their greatest works. Hints appear elsewhere. At Tiwanaku in Bolivia, megalithic stones cut with machine-like precision scatter across the Altiplano, their purpose still debated. At Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, vast stone enclosures were carved and raised thousands of years before agriculture was supposed to exist. In Japan, Yonaguni lies beneath the waves, terraces and steps etched into the seafloor. In India, off Dwarka, divers have traced drowned foundations and walls. None of these prove a single lost civilization. But together they suggest a pattern, advanced construction surfacing suddenly, without precedent, in times and places that should not have known it. They suggest that humanity remembers more than it records, that cultures rise and fall, leaving behind only fragments, whispers, anomalies. Giza is the loudest of these whispers, but it is not alone. The world is dotted with stones that do not fit the story, as if to say, you are not the first. Mainstream archaeology resists this line of thought. To them, absence is evidence. No tools, no cities, no records means no builders outside the pharaohs. The pyramids are Egyptian because there is nothing else to explain them. To argue otherwise is to build castles in sand, speculation without substance. And yet science itself is built on anomalies. The absence of proof is not proof of absence. The missing cities may lie under seas we have not yet explored. The missing tools may be materials that time devoured. The missing records may have been oral, remembered for centuries, and then lost when the last speakers died. The scholars are right to demand evidence, but the stones are evidence too. They stand, mute but undeniable, refusing to collapse under time, and their silence raises questions that absence cannot quiet. Perhaps the builders did not vanish suddenly. Perhaps they faded, scattered, absorbed into the peoples who came after, survivors of floods and deserts carrying fragments of knowledge, how to measure the sky, how to quarry stone, how to tell time in cycles instead of seasons. In myth, these survivors appear as gods or culture bringers. Thoth in Egypt, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Oans in Mesopotamia. Tall figures, bearded teachers, strangers who arrive after catastrophe bearing wisdom. To the people who received them, they were divine. To us they may have been the last keepers of a dying world. If so, then the builders never truly disappeared. Their blood runs in us, their knowledge echoes in myth. Their stones still crouch in sand. What vanished was not them, but the memory of their name. So the question remains, where did the builders go? Did the floods take them? Their cities swallowed by sea? Did the deserts bury them? Their homes erased by shifting sand? Or did they simply dissolve into memory, their last gift to us the stones that outlasted their words? We may never know. But as you stand in the shadow of the Sphinx and the pyramids, you feel their absence as strongly as their presence. The stones are here, the builders are gone, and in that silence lies the greatest mystery of all. Imagine standing on the Giza plateau not as it is today, but 12,000 years ago. The desert you know is not here. Instead, the land blooms with green, grasses ripple under warm winds, rivers braid across floodplains, and herds of gazelle, aurochs, and elephants roam where now only sand lies. The Sahara was alive then, a savanna stretching to horizons, dotted with lakes and shaded by clusters of trees. The Nile swelled larger, slower, its waters fattened by rains far heavier than those Egypt knows today. In this setting, the Sphinx and pyramids would not have towered over desolation, but presided over abundance. Imagine arriving by boat along a wider Nile, docking at carved stone wharves where traders offloaded fish, fruit, and stone blocks quarried upriver. Smoke curled from hearths. Children darted through fields of barley and emmer. To live here then was not to endure a desert. It was to thrive in a fertile world whose climate we barely recognise. The question presses deeper. If people carved the Sphinx in this age, who were they? Farmers on the edge of the Ice Age, carving giant monuments for gods we cannot name, or survivors of a catastrophe who remembered a world before floods, building in stone because stone alone would last. Every day life revolved around the cycle of sky and stone. The builders did not separate astronomy from survival. The heavens dictated planting and harvest, floods and droughts, omens and rituals. At dusk, when the sun dipped into the west, families would look to the stars not only for navigation but for memory. The constellations told stories, but also acted as clocks. Orion's belt, the Pleiades, Sirius, markers of time before calendars. Imagine young apprentices sitting by fires as elders pointed upward, tracing star paths with fingers. There, an elder might say. When that star rises, the river will swell. When it hides, prepare to harvest. The Sphinx itself, staring east, may have embodied this nightly devotion to the heavens. Some scholars argue its gaze locks onto the rising point of Leo, the lion constellation, as it appeared 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If so, then daily life was steeped in a cosmic rhythm. The monuments were not just art, but instruments of time. In this imagined world, masons and farmers were one and the same. A man might cut stone blocks by day, then return to his fields by evening, both labours united by cycles of sun and flood. Women ground grain, tended fires, and wove reeds into mats. But they too carried knowledge of seasons and stars, for survival was communal. Knowledge was not written, it was spoken, chanted, sung. Their houses did not endure. Built from mud brick, reed and timber, their walls melted back into soil after centuries of wind and rain. This is why archaeologists find only faint traces. Shallow depressions, post holes, the ghost lines of long-gone walls. Yet alongside these fragile homes they built in stone what no storm could erase. Picture waking in a reed-thatched hut, stepping into morning sun, and walking toward the looming shadow of the Sphinx. To you, it was not a ruin. It was new, gleaming, its body freshly cut from limestone bedrock, its face painted in ochre and black. Priests poured water over its pores as offerings. Musicians drummed at its feet, sending echoes across the plateau. The Sphinx was alive, the guardian of your world. Daily life moved between two scales, the intimate rhythm of family and field, and the monumental rhythm of temple and sky. You cooked in clay pots, carried jars of water on your shoulder, laughed with neighbours, worried about sickness and storms. Yet when festivals came, you dressed in linen and beads, climbed stone causeways lined with torches, and entered courtyards where colossal blocks dwarfed your existence. These contrasts shaped life. Fragile homes, eternal temples. The labour of stone was not endless slavery as we sometimes picture. More likely it was seasonal. Great building projects aligned with the times of Nile flood, when fields lay under water and farmers were freed from their crops. In those months, men, women and children gathered to haul stone, carve reliefs, polish blocks. Entire communities became workshops, their effort transformed into monuments. But not all stonework was labour. Some was art. Picture artisans crouched in the shade, carving tiny amulets from faience or obsidian. Their hands steady, their patterns precise. These small objects carried the same devotion as the great monuments. Jewellery of shell and gold gleamed on dancers during ceremonies. Pottery painted with spirals and waves spoke of rivers and seas long vanished. We imagine the builders only as heaving labourers, but they were also creators. Their days were filled not only with sweat but with skill, shaping both survival tools and sacred objects, each with a meaning that sang of their world. Every night around fires, stories wove the community together. They spoke of gods who tamed floods, of beasts that lurked in desert shadows, of ancestors who had crossed great waters before the earth shifted. These myths were not mere tales. They carried memory of cataclysm, passed down through generations. The people may have remembered floods that erased lands, skies filled with fire, or endless rains that swallowed fields. To preserve these memories, they carved guardians like the Sphinx. Its lion body may have symbolized strength, its human face, wisdom. It stood as a reminder. We endure, we remember. Side stories grow from this. Imagine a mother whispering to her child, "Once before the sands there were cities by the sea. They're gone, but we are still here." Imagine a priest chanting hymns inside a stone hall, his voice echoing, carrying fragments of knowledge that predated even his own people. To them, myth was not separate from history. It was history in disguise. Daily meals were humble, bread from emmer wheat, beer brewed in clay jars, fish caught from wide rivers, yet feasts turned food into ritual. During festivals, oxen were slaughtered, honey and figs laid in baskets, wine poured into bowls, musicians played flutes and drums, dancers twirled, and torches lit courtyards deep into the night. Food was memory too. The annual flood meant survival. Its bounty was a gift from gods. Eating together reinforced community. Every loaf shared was both nourishment and prayer. When you tore bread at the base of the Sphinx, you were not just eating. You were offering thanks to the forces that allowed the monument, the fields, and your own body to exist. If these were indeed Ice Age survivors, daily life carried a shadow. Every ritual, every carving, every feast may have been haunted by memory of loss. Perhaps they had seen seas rise, fields drown, mountains crack with ice. Perhaps they were the last remnant of a greater world, struggling to preserve fragments of knowledge through stone and story. To live then was to walk among both abundance and fear. Abundance because the land was fertile. Fear because the memory of destruction lingered. They built monuments not only to honour gods but to defy chaos. Stone against water, permanence against oblivion. Imagine being a child then, growing up under the shadow of the Sphinx. You would not know it as a ruin. You would know it as a living guardian, its gaze a promise. We survived once. We will survive again. To picture daily life before the Ice Age is to hold two truths at once. On one hand, they were like us, people who cooked, farmed, laughed, prayed, and worried. On the other, they were unlike us, survivors of cataclysm, builders of monuments that defy time, carriers of knowledge we cannot grasp. The pyramids and Sphinx were not just tombs or temples. They were lifeboats of memory, anchors of permanence in a world that shifted beneath their feet. And if we look at them this way, they are not only monuments of the past, they are messages to us, warnings carved in stone. So we ask, what was their world really like? And what other messages might still lie buried, waiting to be uncovered? Festivals gave the people more than joy. They reminded them that life itself was part of a cosmic order. As long as they honoured the gods, the floods would return, the fields would grow, and the stone would endure. And yet, beneath all this abundance, a shadow stretched. Perhaps the builders remembered a flood so vast it drowned their ancestors. Perhaps they feared the return of rains that could wash away even stone. The myths whisper of fire from the sky, of water rising without end. If these were Ice Age survivors, their festivals and monuments were not only celebrations, they were defences against forgetting. The Sphinx was not just a lion, it was a warning. We endured once, we must endure again. So when we stand at the Giza Plateau today, staring at the battered face of the Sphinx, we are not only looking at stone, we are looking at the ghost of daily life. Children running, farmers sowing, priests chanting, masons chiselling. A whole living world now erased, remembered only in rock. The desert swallowed their homes, their rivers, their laughter, but the Sphinx endures, and in its silent gaze perhaps it still carries their message that the past is not gone, only hidden, that life once bloomed where we see only sand, that our story stretches back further than we dare imagine. Imagine standing in a world of rivers, grasslands and painted monuments. The Sphinx gleams, the pyramids shine, the Nile flows like an artery through the land, and then something changes, slowly at first, then with violence. Clouds vanish from the skies, rains grow scarce, winds shift. The people look upward, wondering what angered the gods. What happens when paradise begins to dry, when fields that once fed thousands begin to crack and shrivel, when rivers shrink and fish die in shallow pools? For generations, memory is carried in stories, and the stories tell of catastrophe. Every culture remembers an ending. The Bible speaks of a flood that drowned the world. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, who survived on a great boat. The Greeks remembered Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Hindus spoke of Manu, warned by a fish to prepare for a deluge. But floods are only half the story. Other myths tell of fire from the sky, comets, meteors, stars falling. The Hopi of North America recall a time when the sky burned and the earth turned upside down. The Mayans carved stories of fire serpents crossing the heavens. Even the Egyptians left hints. Tales of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of destruction, unleashed to cleanse the earth. Could these be distorted memories of real events? A comet impact? A sudden melt of ice sheets that drowned coastlines? Or did ancient priests staring at the stars anticipate disasters we still struggle to understand? Archaeologists have found a strange layer of soil scattered across North America, parts of Europe, and even the Middle East. They call it the Black Mat, a thin strip of dark sediment, dated to around 12,800 years ago. Within it are traces of microscopic diamonds, melted glass, and soot. To some, it looks like evidence of massive wildfires and cosmic impact. A comet fragmenting in the sky, raining fire on Earth, igniting forests, sending shockwaves through oceans. To others, it is coincidence, a geological puzzle with no clear culprit. But for storytellers and researchers alike, the Black Mat whispers the same thing the myths do. Something happened. Something vast enough to kill mammoths, to wipe out entire cultures, to reshape the planet in a single generation. Imagine you are a farmer during this time. You walk to the river expecting fish, expecting water clear and fresh. Instead, you see silt thick as blood, fields drowned by sudden floods, then baked dry weeks later. Seasons that once ran like clockwork now twist into chaos. You pray at the feet of the Sphinx, begging for balance, but even the priests have no answers. The stars no longer rise where they should. Dust clouds the horizon. Herds collapse. Children grow thin. In desperation, your people abandon villages, searching for new water, new fields, a safe horizon. Some travel east, some south, some vanish forever. And those who remain cling to rituals carved in stone. Modern science shows us that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the Ice Age. Entire coastlines were swallowed. Imagine cities, trading ports, fishing villages, temples on cliffs, all drowned beneath waves. Today, divers find strange stone shapes beneath the waters of India's Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni in the Mediterranean near Malta. Are these natural formations or ruins left behind when the oceans rose? If civilizations once thrived along ancient shores, their entire histories now lie drowned. And if the builders of the Sphinx once stood on those coasts, their memory was carried inland, where they carved stone not to survive decades but millennia. The strange part is not that one culture remembers disaster, it is that they all do. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, a god who rose from a lake after a great flood. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh preserved flood tales older than the Bible. In Africa, Bantu myths recall floods that chased tribes into the highlands. Even in Australia, Aboriginal stories describe seas rising and drowning lands their ancestors once walked. Stories now confirmed by geology. If so many peoples remember the same kind of catastrophe, can it really be coincidence? Or are these fragments of a single human memory, scattered, retold, mythologized, all pointing back to the same time? If there truly was a civilization before the desert, why did it vanish? Perhaps the answer is simple. The climate betrayed them. When rains died, when rivers shrank, their fields failed. Priests lost authority, monuments lost meaning, and people scattered. But another possibility is darker. What if their world ended in fire and flood, so violently that survivors could only whisper of it in myth? What if the Sphinx itself is not a guardian of tombs, but a guardian of memory? A reminder in stone of what was lost, built large enough that even if books, cities and languages died, the stone would still stare east at the rising sun, an eternal witness. Modern scholars walk a careful line. They see anomalies, water erosion on the Sphinx, unexplained layers of flood deposits, myths that seem to match geological events. But they also see careers, reputations, and textbooks. To admit the Sphinx might be 12,000 years old is to rewrite history, to admit we are missing entire chapters of humanity's story. So the debate simmers, mainstream chronology on one side, anomaly hunters on the other, both certain, both unwilling to let go. And the Sphinx waits, silent, eroded, its body a riddle neither side can solve. So when we stand before the Sphinx and pyramids today, we are not only seeing monuments, we are seeing survivors, not of dynasties, not of kings, but of cataclysm. The desert hides more than sand. It hides stories of fire from the sky, of floods that erased worlds, of cultures that lived and died long before history began. And the Sphinx, worn but unbroken, still carries that memory, staring east, watching the sun, waiting for us to remember what we have forgotten. Picture yourself in the early 1800s, long before the tourist buses and flashing cameras, long before the fences and guards. The desert is quiet, rolling out beneath a blazing Egyptian sun. Out of the sand, half buried and ghostly, the head of the Sphinx stares back at you. The body is smothered beneath dunes, its paws unseen, its sheer scale impossible to measure. Only the weathered face remains visible, like the crown of some giant fossil jutting out of the earth. Travellers arrive on horseback and camelback, often sketching what little they can see, whispering to one another about its age. To them, this is not just a statue. It is a question carved in stone. By the mid-19th century, Napoleon's expedition to Egypt had already captured the Western imagination. His scholars and soldiers mapped, measured, and catalogued what they could. They drew the pyramids, documented temples, and stood in awe at the sheer audacity of the Sphinx. Yet even they, with all their curiosity, left behind no definitive answers. The Sphinx had no inscriptions, no carved dates, no obvious builder's mark. It seemed to exist outside of time, mute but commanding. And so the questions multiplied. Fast forward a few decades, and men like Auguste Mariette and later Flinders Petrie, pioneers of Egyptology, begin the arduous work of digging the sands away. With ropes, shovels and persistence, they revealed the Sphinx's enormous body its extended pores, and the enigmatic stone temple ruins that stood nearby. Imagine standing there with them, brushing sand off weathered limestone, realising for the first time in centuries just how massive this guardian truly was. What they found was shocking not only for its size but also for its mystery. No hieroglyphs, no clear evidence of purpose, no obvious signs of who ordered it built. The Great Pyramids had tombs, chambers, names scratched into stone blocks. The Sphinx had silence. It was during these years that the official story of ancient Egypt began to crystallise. Scholars eager to impose order proposed that the Sphinx was built under Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. After all, Khafre's pyramid sat directly behind it. In their eyes, it was logical. The pyramid and Sphinx were linked, a monument to royal power. This neat timeline, Sphinx in the Old Kingdom, pyramids as tombs of kings, became the foundation of Egyptology, and once it was set in stone, it became very hard to move. But even then, cracks appeared. Some early scholars noted that the Sphinx seemed far more weathered than its surroundings, its body scarred by deep channels and grooves, unlike the sharp, squared blocks of Khafre's pyramid. The erosion looked like it had come not from wind and sand, but from heavy rainfall, an odd claim in the heart of one of the driest deserts on Earth. Yet these observations were quickly dismissed. To rewrite the age of the Sphinx would have been to rewrite all of Egyptian history, and few were ready to do that. The mystery slept for nearly a century, tucked beneath the certainty of textbooks. But the 20th century had a way of reviving old ghosts. By the 1970s and 80s, a new wave of researchers and thinkers began to ask dangerous questions. Writers like John Anthony West studied the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and dared to suggest they were not the work of sandstorms but of rain. Rain that hadn't fallen on that scale since thousands of years before Egypt's supposed beginnings. He brought in Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, to take a closer look. Schoch wasn't an archaeologist. He wasn't bound by the rigid timelines of Egyptology. He looked at the rock itself, the curves, the grooves, the depth of erosion, and concluded something astonishing. The Sphinx had to be older, much older, perhaps as early as 7000 BCE or even before. Imagine the uproar. Egyptology, long guarded by tradition and prestige, suddenly faced a challenge from outside its walls. To accept Schoch's findings would mean admitting that an advanced civilization capable of carving the Sphinx existed long before the dawn of dynastic Egypt. That would overturn not just Egyptian history but the very narrative of human civilization. Archaeologists scoffed, scholars ridiculed, yet the public listened. Television specials brought the debate into millions of living rooms, books sold worldwide. People were enthralled by the possibility that the Sphinx was a remnant of a forgotten age, a survivor of an Ice Age world that mainstream history refused to acknowledge. The mystery was alive again, and this time it spread far beyond academia. And then there was Robert Bauval, who noticed that the layout of the three Great Pyramids of Giza mirrored the stars of Orion's belt, not as they appear today, but as they would have aligned around 10,500 BCE. To Bauval, this was no coincidence. It was a celestial blueprint carved into stone, a message from an ancient culture obsessed with the heavens. Combine that with Schoch's water erosion theory, and the puzzle grew stranger still. Were the Sphinx and pyramids designed together, both pointing back to a time when Orion hung low in the night sky, when Egypt was green, when rain still fell on the plateau? Orthodox Egyptology pushed back hard. Careers were staked on the traditional timeline, and the idea of Ice Age builders seemed not only absurd but dangerous. It undermined decades of scholarship, museum labels, textbooks, and reputations. The debate became more than academic. It became personal. Conferences turned heated. Papers turned into arguments. To some, Schoch and Bauval were dreamers at best, frauds at worst. To others, they were pioneers, daring to ask the questions no one else would. And yet, the mystery would not die. The more the establishment resisted, the more the public hungered for answers. Why was the Sphinx silent? Why didn't it show water erosion in a desert? Why did the pyramids map the stars? And most of all, why did Egyptology seem so determined to keep alternative ideas buried beneath the sand? You can almost feel the tension, can't you? Picture yourself as one of those early travellers, standing at the base of the Sphinx with sand still piled against its chest. You look up at its weathered face and wonder, not just about who carved it, but about why entire institutions resist the thought of it being older than we're told. Is it pride? Tradition? Fear of rewriting the story of humanity itself? The debate continues today, spilling across books, podcasts, documentaries, and late-night conversations. Some call it pseudo-history, others call it revelation. But whichever side you stand on, one fact remains. The Sphinx refuses to give up its secrets. And in that silence, in that gap between evidence and belief, lies the very reason we can't look away. Because perhaps the Sphinx is not just a statue. Perhaps it is a mirror, reflecting our own struggle to understand the past, to accept mystery, to live with contradiction, and to wonder if the story of human civilization is far older and far stranger than we've ever been allowed to imagine. And so, as we leave behind the heated debates of scholars and step back into the warm desert night, the Sphinx remains where it has always been, silent, immovable, eternal, watching, waiting, daring us to ask what came before. But the story doesn't end here, because beyond the arguments of academics and the whispers of alternative thinkers lies another layer still, the strange, unexplainable connections between ancient sites across the globe. And if the Sphinx truly belongs to a forgotten age, then perhaps it is not alone. Perhaps it is part of a wider pattern, scattered across continents, linking civilizations we have only begun to rediscover. The night in Giza feels timeless. Above the desert, the stars shimmer like scattered jewels, and the Sphinx gazes east as it always has. Yet as you stand before it, something odd happens. The desert begins to blur. Sand dissolves into mist, and when it clears, you're no longer in Egypt at all. The stones beneath your feet are different. The horizon shifted, the air sharp with the chill of another place. The message is unmistakable. The Sphinx is not unique. It is one chapter in a story that stretches far beyond the Nile. Your first step takes you to the hills of southeastern Turkey, where the earth holds a secret that baffled even the most seasoned archaeologists. Beneath layers of soil lay Gobekli Tepe, a temple complex buried deliberately, perhaps to preserve it. Its discovery in the 1990s was like ripping a page out of history and realizing it didn't fit the book. Giant T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons, stand in circles carved with foxes, lions, scorpions, even abstract symbols. The carbon dating placed it around 11,600 years ago, an age that coincides eerily with the end of the last ice age. Before wheels, before pottery, before farming, people here gathered to build something that looks more like a cathedral than a campsite. Imagine the scene. Ancient builders carving stone with stone, hauling pillars without draft animals or metal tools. Who organised them? Why here, on a barren hill with no river to support a city? Some scholars argue it was the world's first temple, a meeting place where scattered tribes united in ritual. Others whisper of lost knowledge, of survivors from a cataclysm carrying memories of construction, far older than their new lives allowed. Gobekli Tepe is to archaeology what the Sphinx is to Egypt, a monument that does not fit the narrative. From Turkey, the vision shifts again. You now stand high in the Andes of Peru, where the walls of Sacsayhuaman rise above the old Inca capital. Here the stones are immense, some the size of buses. They lock together with such precision that not even a razor blade can slip between them. No mortar, no visible seams, yet the walls have withstood earthquakes that flattened modern buildings. Legend says the stones move themselves, carried by sound or the will of gods. The Spanish conquistadors, stunned by the workmanship, thought demons must have been involved. Archaeologists credit the Incas' skill, but the question lingers: how did they cut, move, and fit stones of such colossal size without wheels or iron tools? The air is thin, the mountains steep, and yet here these walls stand, shrugging off time itself. They remind you of the Sphinx not because of their form, but because of their defiance. They defy explanation, and when things defy explanation, we feel the tug of a larger story. Further south, near Lake Titicaca, lies Pumapunku, part of the ancient city of Tiwanaku. Walk among its ruins and you'll see blocks shaped like interlocking puzzle pieces, some cut with machine-like precision, drilled holes and sharp right angles as though crafted in a workshop. Some blocks weigh more than 100 tons, yet were transported from quarries miles away. The precision is startling, corners so crisp they could pass for modern engineering. Archaeologists date it to around 500 CE, but local legends speak of gods descending from the sky, teaching stonework, then vanishing. Skeptics scoff, but once again you see the same themes: massive stone, impossible craftsmanship, and myths of knowledge from elsewhere. The scene shifts once more, this time across the Pacific, where waves crash against the basalt columns of Nan Madol, a city built atop coral reefs in Micronesia. More than 250 structures form a watery labyrinth, each built with massive hexagonal stone columns stacked like Lincoln logs. No one knows how these stones, weighing tons, were quarried and transported across the sea. Oral traditions say the builders had magic, or that the stones floated into place. Scholars admit the feat is extraordinary even with today's tools. Once again, the same haunting question: why build here? Why build this way? And who truly had the power to do it? Across oceans, across cultures, across millennia, the anomalies echo one another. Advanced stonework appearing too early, too sudden, too advanced. Myths of gods, floods, teachers from the sea. It is as though fragments of the same forgotten civilization surfaced in different corners of the globe, each one preserving a piece of a vanished whole. And the flood myths bind them together. Nearly every culture tells the story of a great deluge. In Mesopotamia, it was Utnapishtim surviving the god's wrath. In the Bible, Noah builds his ark. In India, Manu is warned by a fish. In the Americas, Hopi and Maya legends tell of water rising, of people fleeing to high places. Could these be scattered memories of a real event? The Ice Age floods, the Younger Dryas cataclysm, that erased a civilization but left behind survivors? Survivors who built Gobekli Tepe, who carried myths, who taught stonework, who left us monuments as echoes of their world. Standing once more before the Sphinx, you feel the weight of these global whispers. Egypt is not alone. The same pattern repeats across continents. Advanced stonework where it shouldn't exist. Monuments that align with stars. Legends of teachers, floods, and gods. Either humanity repeatedly reinvented the impossible, or the impossible was shared long ago by people whose memory we have lost. And so you ask yourself, what if the Sphinx, the pyramids, Gobekli Tepe, Sacsayhuaman, Pumapunku, Nan Madol, and more are not isolated mysteries but survivors of one story? A story of a forgotten age, erased by ice and water, remembered only in stone. If so, then perhaps these monuments are not just ruins, but markers, lighthouses left to guide us, should we one day awaken and begin asking the right questions again. If you stand today at the base of the Great Sphinx, the desert feels both timeless and alive. The afternoon sun bleeds across the horizon, casting long shadows against weathered stone. The scent of dust mingles with the faint whiff of fuel from the buses lined along the edge of the plateau. Vendors raise their voices, selling miniature pyramids and cold bottles of water. Tourists snap selfies, smiling against the backdrop of one of the most recognizable silhouettes on Earth. But if you stop moving, if you let the bustle fade into the background, you'll notice something else. The silence beneath the noise, the weight of the air pressing against your skin. The strange feeling that this is not just a monument but a presence. You run your hand across the limestone. It is warm, almost alive, its grooves not just carved but scarred by something older than wind and sand. And suddenly, for a moment, the chatter of the modern world slips away, and you could almost believe you have stepped into another age entirely. The plaques around the plateau, the textbooks stacked in classrooms, all agree on one date, around 2500 BCE. That is when Khafre, pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, supposedly ordered this guardian to be carved. But as you stand in its shadow, the story begins to fray. The erosion on the body flows not horizontally as sandstorms would have left it, but vertically, as though water poured down in sheets over centuries. And so the question lingers, how could this monument bear the scars of rain in a land that has been desert for nearly 9,000 years? That riddle is like a thread, and once you pull it, more mysteries unravel. The pyramids behind you, rising like jagged mountains of precision stone, were supposedly raised block by block with copper chisels and sledges. Yet even modern engineers debate whether such a feat could be achieved in 2 decades, as official history claims. Their alignment to Orion's belt, their perfect cardinal orientation, their hidden chambers discovered even in the last decade, all speak of a design that feels less like improvisation and more like a legacy, something planned with knowledge deeper than what we are told ancient builders possessed. And then there are the echoes across the world. Temples in South America, megaliths in Turkey, submerged ruins off the coast of India, all hinting at construction that predates what we consider the dawn of civilization. Could it be coincidence? Or are these fragments of a story too large for us to see all at once? As you watch the last light of day climb up the Sphinx's face, its expression remains unreadable. Some say it carries the face of Khafre, but others note it is too small in proportion to the body, as though carved over a far older head, recut in the image of a later king. Was this guardian first created by hands we no longer remember, only to be adopted and reshaped by the Egyptians we do? If so, the Sphinx itself becomes not a monument of a single age, but a palimpsest, a layered text of civilizations stacked upon each other, each scratching its story over the last. And that possibility touches something deeper, because if the Sphinx and pyramids truly reach back to before the Ice Age, then the entire timeline of humanity is not what we think. Civilization is not a straight line rising from simple to complex, but a cycle, rising, falling, and rising again. If that is true, then we are not the first to build cities, to look at the stars and draw meaning, to carve stone into permanence. We are only the latest. This idea has been whispered by writers and scholars for centuries. Plato spoke of Atlantis, a lost civilization swallowed by water. Ancient Indian texts describe great cities and weapons of fire. Native traditions in the Americas tell of sky people and floods that reshaped the earth. Whether myth or memory, they echo across cultures separated by oceans and time. Could they all be remnants of the same forgotten age, their truths scattered like broken pottery across the world? And so here you stand, not just in front of a monument, but at the crossroads of 2 possibilities. One, that the history we are told is complete, neat, and true, that these stones rose in the age of the pharaohs and nothing more. Or 2, that they are fragments of a deeper story, a story in which the Ice Age ended, seas rose, and with them an entire world was lost, leaving only stone as witness. The modern city of Cairo stretches out behind the plateau, its horns and engines and markets filling the air. Children play soccer in dusty lots. Street vendors laugh as they pour tea. Life carries on, oblivious to the silent giant at its edge. Yet in the middle of this noise, the Sphinx watches east, as it always has, toward the rising sun, toward renewal, toward the cycle of time itself. If you look closely, you'll see tourists placing their palms on its side, as though trying to absorb something of its mystery. You'll see archaeologists in their hats, brushing sand from corners, each convinced they are peeling back one more layer of truth. You'll see dreamers, eyes closed, imagining another world, one where this plateau was green, where rain fell, where unknown hands shaped stone not for vanity, but for memory. And perhaps that is the truest power of these monuments. Not that they answer questions, but that they create them. Not that they hold certainty, but that they ignite wonder. Whether they are 4,500 years old or 12,000, whether they were tombs or something far stranger, they remain alive because they make us ask, who are we, really? And how many times have we begun again? As twilight deepens, the desert cools, and the first stars prick the sky above the pyramids. Orion rises in the east, just as it did thousands of years ago, just as it will long after we're gone. The alignment is no accident. The builders knew this sky, and they left their message in stone. Perhaps it was meant for us. Perhaps it was meant for those who will come after us. So the mystery remains. The Sphinx is silent. The pyramids stand. The desert whispers. And you, standing there, become part of the story. A fleeting witness to something that will outlast you. You don't have to believe in lost civilizations, in floods, in forgotten knowledge. You don't even have to agree with the theories that challenge the textbooks. All you have to do is stand there, feel the weight of the stone beneath your hand, and let the possibility linger. That long before history began, long before our ancestors carved their first words, someone else stood here, looking at the same stars, carving a message into stone that we are still trying to read. And maybe, just maybe, the Sphinx is not here to tell us what happened, but to remind us to keep asking, to wonder, to imagine, to never let the past become only what we are told, but to listen for the voices carved into silence. Where are you watching from tonight? Do you believe the Sphinx guards only the kings of Egypt, or does it guard a secret far older, one that stretches back to the end of an age? Leave your thoughts below, because in the end, this mystery is not just mine or yours, but ours, a puzzle for all of humanity. And so we end not with answers, but with echoes. The Sphinx keeps its secrets, the pyramids keep their silence, and the desert, eternal and shifting, keeps time. But maybe that's the way it was meant to be. Because sometimes the greatest stories are not the ones we solve, but the ones that keep us searching, across the sands of history into the stars of tomorrow.